In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. A week or so ago, the church commemorated a very important part of our church life. One that we rarely see in the usual commemorations of the week. It had to do with the bodiless powers, the angels. As you all know, before the creation of man, the angelic hosts were created to be like hand maidens, hand assistants to the Lord. Not that he needs assistance, but in order to share the glory that he is able to give to intelligent creatures. As you also know, 1/3 of those did not listen to the Lord's declarations and fell and became the demonic realm, which to this day rules the material world until the second coming of Christ, where all these things will be changed into a new heaven and a new earth. On that particular day, we also commemorated one of the great saints of our time. We just showed you an icon of that person, and I'd like to say a few words about that because it's so important considering the work that this person did. His name is Metropolitan Philaret, and he reposed in the mid-1980s after a most amazing life. Recently, this year, we were pleased to have been acquired this particular life of him. Quite a large book, very large indeed, some 800 pages. It covers his life, it covers his sermons, it covers some of his teachings, it covers his miracles, it has photographs, it has all sorts of very important information. Bearing in mind that he lived during our times and was instrumental in defining and exposing many of the heresies and wrong teachings that occurred worldwide at that time, in particular ecumenism, Sergianism, those sorts of things. He stands as a real great saint of our time. I'm not going to go too much into his life because you can read it here, quite detailed, other than to say that in his earlier days when he and the flock were living in the Chinese realm, Harbin, and there was wars with Japanese and other, he suffered much and was miraculously prevented from being killed by Japanese who were ready to slaughter him and cut him and do all sorts of terrible things. Having escaped all that in the end, he came and settled in Australia, in Brisbane, and became the bishop there, later to be elected as the Metropolitan of the Russian Orthodox Church abroad, which is another history in itself, which is covered in here. However, what this book opens up is another great possibility, namely another person the most closely associated with Metropolitan Philaret. And the one I am talking about is Protodeacon Nikita, who was his cell attendant for many years. What is a cell attendant? Well, you know what a valet is, gentleman's gentleman, one who assists an honourable, rich, famous person in various ways so that they can get through their day with the least fuss, particularly if they're old. Cell attendant has similar duties but in the monastic realm. His work is to ensure the safety, above all, of the bishop, of preparing him for the services of the day, and that's not an easy task for a bishop. There's all sorts of vestments and whatever, let alone often travelling many, many kilometres, hundreds of kilometres sometimes, to visit the flock in various places. And Metropolitan Philaret had a worldwide flock from Australia, America, South America, Asia, all sorts of places. Making sure that his health is in order, that he's fed properly, if he's on medication, that is given to him, that his sermons and important talks are recorded for posterity, because it's very important to get those sorts of things done. When Father Nikita was still a kid, it had been, during one of the services, or maybe after the service, for some reason he was weeping and carrying on, whether he was distressed or upset or whatever, with his mother. Standing there was a holy man, I think his name was Ignatius, though I may have got that one wrong, who turned to the young future Metropolitan, who was a monk, and said that this kiddo is going to be important to you in your life. And indeed, as the time matured, Father Nikita became the cell attendant of Metropolitan Philaret for many years. On certain occasions, Father Nikita had to travel and do all sorts of other activities, leaving the Metropolitan by himself. In one of these occasions during 1980 and 81, I was chosen to be the deputy cell attendant for a while there in New York. And that was quite a task and an eye-opener in many respects on the sort of things that happen to a person of this caliber, and how in particular there are many enemies trying to destroy him through poisonings, glass for example, powder in food, vehicle accidents, all sorts of sabotages and all sorts of things like that. Not to mention all the huge slanders that are thrown at holy people. When I was being groomed to look after him, one of the things that really struck me was Father Nikita, when he was telling me, gave me a box full of medication and said, this one you give at this time, this one at that one, this one at this one before bed, this one during the night, this one here, this one there. If he collapses, you give him this one. I thought, my goodness me, there was something like 20 different types of medication, which because he was old, Father Metropolitan Philaret was already old and frail in many respects. Father Nikita, Protodeacon Nikita, was a righteous person who indeed had a very objective relationship with the Lord, which came through in his deeds. He was able to do things that others could not do, and this aided in having Metropolitan Philaret live the sort of life that he led and to bring forth the fruit that he brought forth. That is not mentioned in this book, which unfortunately only opens up the possibility of collecting material about Father Nikita and writing a life of him as well in his capacity both before and after. He was a married man, he was not a monk, but he went to the service of the Metropolitan by agreement and was able to do quite incredible things that I can't even get my mind around it. For example, the Metropolitan loved to go fishing. You know, relaxing, you sit by the river, whatever. Doesn't matter when you catch something. On account of this, people knew about it and gave him dozens and dozens of rods where they didn't know where to put them all or kept them in a shed. He wanted to go fishing one day, but did not have a license. This was in the USA. And he told Father Nikita. Father Nikita said, I'll get you a license. I said, how can you? You're not an American citizen. How can you get a license only for American citizens? I said, well, if you bless me, I'll go and get a license to fish. I said, well, God bless you. All right, all right. So Father Nikita goes off, comes back after a couple of hours and said, here's your license. I said, how'd you get that? Well, I just went to the agency, filled in the form, paid the fee, and they gave me a license. But, what did you write for the address? You know, the state that you're living in. NSW for New South Wales. You know, whoever was looking at that license application was probably too embarrassed to ask what is NSW, because there's 50 states in America. Very few people know them all and all their abbreviations. So they gave me a license. All legal and nice. At another time, it was a Saturday morning, Father Nikita wakes me up and says, come on, we're going down to Manhattan, to the heart of New York. So we got into this Cadillac, which he had bought specially for the Metropolitan, and we drove to Wall Street, where all the finances occurred, because on a Saturday it's not operating. We parked, and he said, sit in the car. As long as you're sitting there, no one is going to ticket you for this, for being parked here. I said, okay. And Father Nikita walks off, and he's gone for half an hour, over an hour. I see him coming back, carrying in both hands rolls and rolls and rolls of brocade, of various fabrics for the making of priestly vestments, with a big grin on his face. And he comes, puts it in the car and says, gee, I got a deal out of that one. I said, what do you mean? Well, I got it for half price. How'd you manage that? Well, as you know, the whole rag trade, fabric trade in New York is run by Jews. Saturday morning, I went there, picked what I wanted, asked for the price, and he gave me the price, and I said, I'll give you half of that. I said, how come half? I said, well, if you don't give me half, I'll tell your rabbi that you're working on Saturday. And hence, he had to be given at half price. That's the sort of uncanny things that this person was able to do. Of course, there were many more important things. He saved many people from all sorts of troubles, often saving their life. Every evening at the Synod, this is the main building where the Metropolitan would live in New York and other bishops would come there. He would walk around all the floors. It was once a mansion. And he would check doors and windows to make sure they were locked and closed, that electricity and gas appliances and all that sort of thing were turned off, because there was so much sabotage going on, so many ways that somebody could get in there and cause harm. To make ends meet, Father Nikita was a skillful jeweler, and he would make crosses for the church, you know, neck crosses and whatever, out of gold, silver. And often, when you're working with those sort of substances, you need cyanide, potassium cyanide, for dissolving gold and whatever. He had a room on a third floor, I think it was, in the Synod, and he had these chemicals. But where do you think he kept the chemicals? Because cyanide's a deadly poison. Not in his room, in the corridor. Can you understand this situation? Because if there's a poisoning and something going on, anybody could have taken that. Anybody could have done that. You see this, the wisdom of these sort of things. In any case, it would be fantastic, if it hasn't already been started, that there be a activity to capture the very things of Father Nikita's life and to also write that into a life, because he is a righteous cell attendant of our times. He said to me that it was prophesied to him about his repose. He didn't give me the details, but he hinted that when Metropolitan Philaret would die, which was, I think, in 1986, he would go very soon. And indeed, in 2 years' time, he died from leukemia. I think it was not possible to save him anymore. Quite young. He wasn't old. I think in his 50s, something to that effect. Leaving behind a legacy which really allowed Metropolitan Philaret to do the many, many things that he did. Having said that, each year, Father Nikita, with a youth group, would produce these exquisite wall calendars. This one is from, what, 1991, right? He would always make it a little bit ahead. These have a story as well, because there are several decades of these that he did, high quality, and he had them printed in Taiwan because they were able to do this sort of printing at a reasonable cost. And when he was negotiating that, the printing of these calendars and the printing of some books that he was also doing, he had quite a collection of fantastic books that he wrote. Picture books, ones about the royal family, about Mount Athos, about holy places in the world, holy places in Russia, all very well put together. High quality, not sort of cheap paperback things. Negotiating these prices with the Taiwanese who were speaking Chinese, he would listen in to their Chinese conversation. They were not knowing that he was perfectly literate in Chinese, having lived in Harbin for such a long time. And they would, amongst themselves, agree on the lowest possible price. And therefore, Father Nikita's offer was for that price. Whatever the price they negotiated privately amongst themselves, he heard it. And that was the price he settled at. And, they couldn't do anything about that. They were speechless, particularly when he replied to them in perfect Chinese. That sort of put the whole thing in perspective of who they were dealing with. I think most of you know something about Solzhenitsyn, the famous writer, who also was instrumental in exposing many of the terrors of communism. And after he was expelled from Russia and came to America, Father Nikita was sitting at the airport in his vestments. Solzhenitsyn came out of the plane, out of the rooms there, with dozens and dozens and dozens of reporters jostling to get some statement out of him because he was so famous, Solzhenitsyn. So what do you think Solzhenitsyn did? He just walked straight to Father Nikita and conversed with him, ignoring all those other reporters and all those sorts of things. Again, these sorts of things need to be captured in a book in detail for those that witness them. And I witnessed quite a few of those things, and I witnessed also his prophetic life as well. For example, one day I was walking down the stairs in the evening at the Synod building, and Father Nikita was walking up with a plate of fish, flounder I think it was. And he stopped me and he said, "Can you count how many fish are there?" So I counted them, 5 or something, I don't remember. I said, "That's good." I thought, well, what's all that about? Well, I found out in the morning. In the morning there was massive commotion in the kitchen. They were blaming Father Nikita for stealing fish and for using the resources wrongly. Father Nikita said that Vladimir knows what happened, go and ask him. So the Metropolitan called me over and said, "Well, how many fish were there?" I said, 5. I saw them. Settled, the issue was settled. So he predicted that because of those fish, there would be problems there because of all the enemies that wanted to harm him and harm the Metropolitan one way or another. They were forever there, certain personalities telling him to get lost, to get out of that synod, to go away, that he has no right there. Yet he's the right-hand man of the Metropolitan. Can you imagine that? If they got rid of the Father Nikita, he would have been dead pretty quickly. When he went to hospital, for example, with sickness and stayed there, Father Nikita would sleep on the floor to make sure the safety of the Metropolitan. Such was his ascetic life and all the things that he did. That's why I think we need to do something, because he spent most of his time in the USA with these sorts of activities. I am sure many people, particularly parish wardens and all those with whom he dealt with, would have some very good stories to tell about their relationship with him. He said to me one day, "I always eat lunch backwards." I said, "What do you mean you eat backwards?" I said, "Well, we serve with the Metropolitan in a parish, and invariably there's a bit of a meal for everybody after that. I have to remain behind, putting vestments away, packing things up, cleaning everything up in the altar and whatever. And by the time I get to the meal, they're serving the sweets. So I have the sweets. Then they bring in the main course, and then they bring in the soup and the starters. So he's eating backwards because he was absent at the very start of the thing. Ascetic effort. Anyway, that might be enough for this time, but bear in mind, there are pictures of Metropolitan Philaret with Father Nikita in this book. Quite a few, but very little is actually said about it. This is the thing that gets me, that people went to the extent of writing an 800-page book and left him out pretty much completely. Well, it wasn't his life, obviously, but the life of this person was very much dependent upon the activities of Father Nikita. My exhortation to you all is to pray for him, and that we might be able to get a life of Father Nikita sooner rather than later, and fill in the blanks about the life of the Metropolitan, which is so important because so much he clarified the various heresies and problems that are trying to destroy the church today. God help us in all this. And just remember the reading today from the Gospel, where a rich man builds more storage facilities, hoping to live many years in comfort, but they demand his soul. And the Lord said, "To whom are you going to leave all this?" He doesn't condemn having material wealth, but The Lord says, the one who treasureth up for himself, that is, material possessions, and is not rich towards God, will suffer perhaps damnation in their life. Which reminds me of one woman, a rich woman, who had a particularly lovely fur coat that she absolutely adored and always was with that and looked after it. When she was dying and when she died, she hung on to that coat for dear life. So much so that men could not unclasp her hands from it, and they had to bury her with that coat. Such is the extent to which people can get possessed by these things. May we be ever in that situation. Always remember that whatever your possessions are, material, make it so that if they're lost for any reason, that you don't lament about it, that it does not cause you a great falling away from righteousness, because many people do. Always arrange your life so that whatever you have, and however it might be, it's never going to get in the way of your spiritual life. God help us, preserve us, and keep us in all things.